Hey everyone, it's Blake. Welcome in to this special choosing our next TEW9 save video here on the channel, as we're going to look at some options for adding another save to the rotation. Just as a note, if you didn't see the community post, the WWF Invasion 2001 save file was corrupted. However, I did have a backup, but it wasn't actually a recent backup. So I had to go back, book a couple of the older shows, and kind of catch up. And so I've been going back, watching the videos, booking every single segment, which you guys know I'm putting 20 plus segments into these videos. And so it's been a bit of a process to get back to the point where actually we're on the next edition of the show on Raw. And so that will be in the next couple days. I'll give you guys the next video on that. But yeah, we had to sort of back up to be able to go forward again because we just had to go back and book everything the same as I did last time. So yeah, that was a bit frustrating. But working on the next episode now, and so that's coming. So we're not pushing that one to the side. That's going to be the flagship sort of here on the channel, moving forward. And so that's kind of where we stand on that. But as always, just like we did TEW 2020, I mean, like to have just kind of something where if I just want to have a mental break from the main sort of series and just jump into something else, have some fun with it, what else can we do? So that brings us to some options here. And this is not going to be one where I'm necessarily going to make a choice. I'm just going to give you guys the options that I find most interesting, and you can give me your feedback as always, and that will probably decide what we do. All right, so we're starting here, potential options, right? Obviously, if you look at the biggest sort of thing on this channel has been, the WWE 2021 save. That one went 100 plus episodes, and that was at a time where WWE was really, kind of in a position where I needed an alternative because I wasn't enjoying it at the time, right? And so fast forward 2025, and WWE's a bit in a much better spot, I would say, creatively. So when I see this right here, and I just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, this is pretty intimidating to me, even though there are people that I look over here and I'm like, I'd love to do a storyline with that and this person and that person. I'd love to. But I am just not really in a position where I feel like I can probably put the energy into doing these the same way that I did them back in 2021. And so that's why, you guys saw it last year. I tried to do the WWE 2024, I think that was. Did we do that? Or was that earlier this year? I don't remember. It was last year. But I got 10 episodes in. I was like, I'm not into this because I don't really have an issue with the current WWE product. It's not perfect, but I don't have an issue with it. And I'm not really trying to outdo it. So at the same time, I'm sort of just kind of looking at it I'm not really that into trying to do exactly what they're doing or just tweak it a little bit, right? If I'm doing something, I want to do something that's a bit different. And so I'm probably going to not do this one. So of the ones of the current day saves people have asked about, would I want to do a series with one of the current companies? I'm probably going to immediately just cancel out WWE because I just don't think that's an option. I know people have asked about AEW. We had an AEW save here on the channel in 2020, and I had some fun with that one. But I just mentioned the scrolling on WWE's roster. This is more. I'm still going. There are that many people on the roster, and I just don't know if that's necessarily what I'm looking for, is just the gigantic rosters right now, because a side series could always become sort of the main flagship on the channel, right? If you guys love it that much, it can be, but even with this, I know there's a lot of talented people on this roster, but I just am looking at the thought, knowing how I am, you guys know I like to be very detailed, and so I'm going to get into it where I'm just going to be looking at 100 plus wrestlers and wanting to have something for all these people to do, and it's just not realistic, right? So I think as I look at this too, I'm just kind of I don't know about this. I don't know if I want to take on the challenge that is AEW with just such a big roster. It would be fun, don't get me wrong. It would be fun to do, and I think there's probably ways I could do it where it's not as intimidating, but at the same time, I'm looking at the roster and I'm just already kind of all right, my spreadsheet, time to get the spreadsheet out. It'll take me a couple hours just to get everything and put it into the spreadsheet with a roster like this. And so I'm not sure about that. So that's just kind of something that I'm sort of not thrilled about maybe with AEW, but it's it's more intriguing to me than WWE. I will say that. So if you're trying to pick from the choices of 2025, I think this to me, AEW way more appealing than WWE. Now there is a wild card choice here, and to me it's NXT because look, there's still some scrolling here too. But I will tell you, it's probably more so a situation with NXT where I wouldn't really feel the pressure to use everyone on this roster because it is more about, it's NXT, right? And so when I look at kind of the state of NXT right now, is it my favorite show each week? No, but I find it pretty entertaining. And I think there's some people and some stories that you have to work with NXT that would be pretty interesting. Now, the problem is if you're playing as NXT, you always get the note when you start, you are not an independent company. You are within WWE's decision making, right? So then WWE can alter some of those decisions. They can always do different things that kind of mess with your plans. So I don't know if I love that idea either, because I'm just like, I wouldn't want that, because if I'm planning out, however long in advance, well, that may not actually get there, right? Because they may be calling people up and it's stuff like that, right? I feel like that happens in this. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So when I look at it from that standpoint, I'm just like, it sounds fun to do NXT, but at the same time, it's financially, we know how that works. You're owned by WWE and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know. So all that to tell you, of the 2025 options, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know that there's one that's just completely standing out to me to be kind of the obvious choice. So that is probably the only issue with picking a current one. I know people mentioned TNA. We're going to talk about TNA in a second, but it's not a 2025 save because I don't really find that one appealing compared to the other three. So if I had to say one of the 2025 ones that I would probably be most interested in, it may be AEW, but I'm just, you can tell I'm not really sold on that. So for that reason, you can probably tell we may just hold off on the 2025 ones for right now. But that brings us to other potential options. And that's where we get into 2004, as you can see here. One of the mods that's out there, we know it's a 2004 mod. That's one I've entertained before back on TEW 2022 when it comes to, being in a position where, hey, WWE, the brand split, all that, ruthless aggression, all that fun stuff could be an option. So that's one I've considered. It again is kind of one where there's such a big roster. And also now, too, as I'm looking at this, we're doing the Invasion 2001, and I'm like, 3 years, kind of the same thing. It's just a little bit different, right? I mean, obviously we're focusing more on the Invasion now, but you got a lot of your same cast of characters, and I don't know if I'd want to be doing kind of dueling things where they're playing a role in this save as this person and the another person, another one, so it's just like, that doesn't really find that much interest to me. I mentioned TNA 2004. Not a huge roster. If you kind of look at sort of the main people that were on the roster, obviously AJ Styles, 25 at the time, right? You've got, young Chris Harris at 30, Chris Sabin's there, like Christopher Daniels, CM Punk. You can kind of look at, if you're touring the company, your main talents. You've got Sting, Ken Shamrock, Jeff Jarrett, Raven, Christopher Daniels. So this is kind of in a period where, TNA is still kind of in its early stages. And so there may be something fun to that. You don't have a lot of money to work with. You're a small company. You're not, again, competing on the same level as a WWE when you just look at kind of the size and all that. I mean, we're talking about for TNA, 45, so not really a huge thing there. When you do kind of go down the roster of guys that could be used, you've got some interesting people here, like a Ron Killings, guys like that. Obviously, Low-Key was pretty big at the time in terms of being a potential guy and all that. But you can kind of go out and try to find some of the rising talent and all that kind of stuff. So I can't say this is probably at the top of my list, but it is one that I've thought about. I mean, the other one that would make sense, right, is Ring of Honor. Because when you look at this roster, I mean, if you look at the top 5 here, it doesn't really get much bigger than this when it comes to looking at this timeline and seeing what all of these guys would go on to do, right? With Daniels and Styles and Samoa Joe and Danielson and Punk. And, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really watch a lot of Ring of Honor back in the day. I don't have kind of the reference point of all of these stories and all this. And so for me, it would kind of be starting clean. with a blank slate of using all these different people in interesting ways. And so, from that standpoint, their schedule, pretty manageable, right? I mean, you've just got, it's an event-based deal. And so you're building around events. Can you get a TV deal? All this other stuff. That's an interesting element to me. And look, it's a tiny company, 10th in the world, much different than the other companies we've played with on the channel. So if I'm looking at the 2004 options, I think ROH and certainly, a TNA, that could be an interesting idea if we wanted to do something like that in 2004. All right, another choice is we go back to 1992. And you guys remember in 2020, we did the WWF 1992 save. We did about, I think it was 10 or 11 episodes. And I've thought about simply rebooking all of those episodes in TW9 and just continuing that series. But we could also start anew. If I did do that, I probably would not do that in the WWF because I wouldn't want to rebook all those same shows exactly the same. Again, that's the better option. If you guys choose, you want me to keep the WWF one going, I would probably just simply go back and rebook all those shows in TW9 and then continue the series from there. But if I decided to go with something else, obviously WCW would make sense just from the standpoint of looking at kind of, the state of the roster. You've got Sting, Luger, Steamboat, Rude. 92 was such a great year for WCW. Nikita Koloff, excuse me. I'm going to always do that as someone who watched the WWF a lot. I've been watching a lot of 80s stuff in the WWF, and I'm like, Nikolai Volkov is on my mind, but Nikita Koloff, of course, is there. Your state of your champions, Juice Thunder Liger's on the roster. Your television champion at the time was Austin. And so it's a very appealing idea, I think, for WCW. If I wanted to keep the 92 theme going, but if you guys are like, hey, just maybe get into this one. Although we're really enjoying the WWF one in 92. So maybe, I think multiple options here. This mod is so good. So I'm open to multiple options on that one. Depends on what you guys are kind of rooting for there. Would you like to see the WWF one continue that we already started 10 episodes in, or would you like to start anew with something like WCW at the time? That's an option for that one. It does get us to the CVerse in TW9, because you guys know we really got into the TCW 2020 save. It was probably, again, one of my, if not my favorite save we've ever done on the channel. It was just, being able to have blank slates with all these different wrestlers and, kind of use that from character standpoint and all that. It was very exciting. And, obviously it would be hard. In all honesty, I would prefer, if there was one series I would keep going from 2020, that may be the one, just because, going back, kind of looking back through my notes and everything, we had so many things that were playing out and long-term stories that were built a year out from where we were in the save. It was kind of wild. But anyways, if we're looking at options for the CVerse now and where it stands in TW9, I do have a couple favorites based on what I've looked at so far. So, again, I would not want to do TCW again, and I'm just being completely honest about that. And the reason why is, not a lot's really changed. As you can tell, there just was not a big jump from 2020 to 2022 in terms of the game time. And this is where we get into the photos, right? The AI photos. For me, it is one of those things where, I like some of them. There are others where I look at some of these people and I'm like, because I played TCW so much, I'm like, in my mind, that wasn't what they look like, right? I'm thinking of, I know the ones that had the blue backgrounds and all this, and they weren't real, but, in your mind, you're just envisioning a different look. So when I look at Wolf here, I look at Wolf Hoggins and I'm like, in my mind, that was not Wolf, and then I'm looking at other people. I think that's a pretty good J Cord. Aaron Andrews, probably another one that's probably not exactly what I was envisioning in my mind. And so, that becomes a little bit tougher for me. And I know that sounds silly, but it's just I had played that game and we were, 40 episodes in or something. And I'm just I just had a vision of what these guys looked like. And so whenever I look through the roster, I'm just sort of that doesn't necessarily fit what I was thinking. Now, again, that's just, it's just a product of having a completely different look and those kind of things. It's not the exact same. And so probably that's where it gets a little difficult for me to go with TCW in this one, because again, like they're just people you have a certain thought of what they are, right? And I just think that was kind of something that stood out for me. So I would probably stay away from TCW, to be honest with you. Even unless all of you guys are voting for it, I would rather just pick that one up and just keep playing 2020 and maybe do that sporadically on the channel rather than start a new save with TCW. Now, what are the other options that I've looked at and feel that are the most intriguing? I don't mind the CWA. I know that was brought up too in the comments. I think they're an interesting one. Again, if I'm looking at kind of the AI photos, I kind of can see some separation a bit more with some of these. Like Christian Price, that kind of is. He's, a long time in the CVerse. Like that kind of looks pretty probably what I thought. Like I see kind of some defining features here of people like our guy Ed Stone, who we know we had in the TCW save. That's probably not too far off from like the thinking with him, like Jack the Colt, guys like that who we've again seen. I kind of like CWA. It is more of that one where if you sort of look at the state of the company, you got sort of your basic, hey, one TV show every week, and you've got your events and those kind of things. So that is one that I could see as a possibility, kind of a big roster. Can't say I love that necessarily, but it is where you're just kind of starting fresh and you're going and just looking at different people you've not used before in sort of this way of booking shows to the level that we do. And so I find that one appealing. Picking from the big three, like I said, if we're taking out TCW, then, is it USPW or is it SWF? I think that's probably your biggest question here. Obviously, the USPW, like you just have the biggest sort of allotment of different things, and you can kind of look at the thing in terms of like what is the product, right? And you kind of know that their product is family friendly. We kind of would go back to sort of the 80s type style booking that we would use and those sort of things. And so I mean that I don't know, like I'm not as intrigued by that option, to be honest with you. Of the big three, SWF is probably the one that I find the most appealing right now, because you do have kind of some pretty identifiable differences with sort of your top talent and all that stuff, which just makes sense, right? The product is sports entertainment. You guys know pretty much everything we booked is sports entertainment. You have the weekly TV show. You don't have the two, so like I'm okay with that. Just a weekly show every Tuesday. Kind of have your normal event schedule, all that kind of stuff. So I don't mind that. Just sort of from that standpoint, roster wise, it's not a huge roster compared to some of the others we looked at, right? Like in the real world and all that kind of stuff. So I think that is probably one that I'm at least curious about if I decided to go that route. As I went through this and sort of thinking about the nature of how different it is now with the new photos, there was one company that stood out to me, and that was EILL, which of course is the biggest company in Mexico. And if you're wondering why did that stand out, right? And this is something that would be completely different than anything else we've ever done on the save. But it's because of simply the different sort of distinctions, like visibly, like, right? The visuals here, how different each person is because you have the masks involved, right? And I think to me, that is a very interesting thing where, some of these you may like more than others, but when I think about it, I'm like, okay, if it is like we're using this sort of new photo scheme and everything, I really like the ones where there is just a clear difference as you go through the roster. And like as I go through this roster and I'm looking at sort of the top, like we can even just filter this, right? If we just filter this by like the top people, I guess I won't, but just you get my point. Like there is a clear difference between a lot of these superstars to where you can kind of use that in terms of just the different like Dr. Rudo, one of our biggest stars in EILL right now. Like there's such a difference. And so you just keep going. And like, I think, let me look, here's one that's a perfect example. So to me, like these are the ones that, really stand out in terms of having this sort of new look. And I feel like I would probably be able to lean into that a bit in terms of looking at some of these people and being like, okay, there's a really fun idea just based off of sort of the look. We would probably lean into kind of the booking style, you'd have more of your, you'd have more trios matches. You'd have more just kind of, different matches, mask versus hit, like all those things, mask matches, like you've had all that kind of stuff. And it would be different. But I do think this is kind of an interesting one to look at. But again, I'm not necessarily like, hey, we have to do this one. But it is something where I think there are some differences that could be interesting. And maybe we would get into it and be like, you know what, this just isn't as exciting as I thought. But it's at least something that I've thought about with them. So if there are any other promotions in the CVerse, you guys let me know what you think. I'll give them more of an interesting look. But right now, I think those are kind of some of the ones. Probably for me, SWF is standing out, and so is EILL. And I'm not against either one of them, really. I think both are pretty good choices based on kind of my expectation for what we want to do with those saves. But again, I'm open to both, to be honest with you. And maybe SWF's a little bit closer to EIL, but maybe it's the visuals when it comes to that. So both of those to me are in the running for the CVerse, but again, I'm open to other options too, if you guys would, like to see those. All right, so there you go. So that's kind of those are your options. And I know it's quite a few, and I threw out a lot of stuff, but I kind of wanted to go through each of these mods, give you an idea of where I'm at. Still, I will tell you, I would probably pick above all else. Like if there was a good 80s mod out there that I just don't know about, I would still like to go back and do that at some point, doing kind of an 80s save. I know that wouldn't be for everybody. And I know we have one, we had the one in 92, but like that sort of mid 80s to late 80s is still kind of the sweet spot for me. I'd love it if there was one like that, but I just haven't found it yet. So if anyone has any ideas on that, if you've maybe transferred any of the 2020 mods that carry over okay in the 80s, let me know. But I kind of miss just some of those. Like even it was like back in the day, TEW 13 maybe, all those. There were some good 80s mods, I feel like, back then. But that was a long time ago. So, yeah, curious if there's any others out there that you guys have seen. But let me know, and let me know your choice. What would you like to see as a potential new side save here on the channel? As I said, WWF Invasion 2001 still going to get most of my focus, but I still always like to have something different. If you're like, hey, I'm not really into the Invasion stuff. All right, well, here's another option for you, right? So that's kind of what we're going for here. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Plenty of options, whether it's going back to 1992, whether it is maybe trying out one of the 2025 ones with an AEW, something like that maybe. That may be your most interesting choice. Or could it be, a 2004 ROH, TNA, something like that? Or is it one of these in the CVerse, which I feel like is probably going to be a popular answer. I don't know, but we just had so much fun with the TCW one. I feel like there are a lot of people who would like to see kind of how things come along here as, could we do an SWF? 50 years since the SWF is created, a 50-year anniversary year. And wouldn't that be fun to book, looking at all kind of the biggest performers of the past and leaning into the history? Or do we lean into Lucha Libre and go with EILL? Lots of fun options. All right, you guys let me know what you think. Leave your suggestions, your votes in the comments. And ultimately, yes, I will probably just be like, okay, these are the one I want to do once I kind of look at them more, but I do want your feedback because that will help me make a better decision on what we do here for the channel. I don't expect it to be a consensus, so we will just kind of go with one that maybe you guys are supporting. So appreciate you guys. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well. Next WWF Invasion episode coming in a couple days. Again, I'm just finally getting back to the point where I can book that one because we had to go back and rebook everything because the save got corrupted. There you go. All right, appreciate you guys watching. And let me know your thoughts on a potential new save here on the channel.